Hey there, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Salmon TV. I'm your host, Salmon, and today is finally the day. The day we've all been secretly waiting for, the day we've known to be on the horizon since I first started making videos. It's time to talk about Spider-Man. Spider-Man rules, plain and simple. I've always been a fan of the webhead, from cartoons to video games. In fact, Spider-Man for the PlayStation is the first game I ever owned, like, the first game I could say confidently belonged to me. So naturally, I would watch the various Spider-Man cartoons a lot when I had the chance to. Disney Plus has been a key enabler of my Spider-Mania, and through my watching, I rediscovered a series that had ran for 3 seasons on NBC from 1981 to 1983, and would only be on the air far past when I should have been asleep. Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends follows the adventures of the Spider-Friends, a trio comprised of Peter Parker, Bobby Drake, and Angelica Jones, who use their superhero identities of Spider-Man, Iceman, and Firestar to fight various Marvel villains, while occasionally teaming up with other Marvel heroes. While Spider-Man and Iceman were established Marvel heroes, Spidey having first appeared in Amazing Fantasy number 15 in 1962, and Iceman in the debut issue of the X-Men the following year, Firestar was an original character developed for Amazing Friends. The story goes that the original pitch for the show involved Spider-Man, Iceman, and the Fantastic Four's Human Torch, Johnny Storm. Due to licensing issues, however, getting Human Torch was a non-starter, and to keep the idea of Spidey having one friend with ice powers and one with fire powers intact, they created Firestar, a mutant capable of generating and manipulating microwave radiation, allowing her to fly and produce fire. After Amazing Friends' run ended, it wouldn't be until 2 years later that Firestar made her comic debut in Uncanny X-Men number 193. As a show itself, I thought Amazing Friends was neat for giving Spidey other superhero partners to help him on his adventures, but an argument could be made that Spider-Man works best as a solo act. I personally think Spidey works well on a team, so long as the personalities of his partners allow for engaging interactions. Spidey loves to crack wise, so pairing him with people he can play off of helps his overconfident sense of humor shine. Ultimate Spider-Man did a good job with this, but I may be due for a rewatch to make sure I'm remembering it right. Amazing Friends wasn't perfect by any means, but I think it's a charming show despite having a bit of that late 70s camp. Doesn't help that I was introduced to Spider-Man cartoons via the 90s series, which is quite different tonally.
Get back here, Shocker! Shocker! You can't escape me! I'll chase you to the ends of the earth!
This brings us to the subject of today's video. As a tie-in with the show, Marvel produced a one-shot adaptation of Amazing Friends' first episode. Get comfortable, everyone, and let's take a look at Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends number 1, The Triumph of the Green Goblin. Our cover is another one of those Blue Void deals, like Craftsman Bolt-On System saves the Justice League, though this might be on account of everyone being airborne and we're simply above the skyline. Spider-Man is swinging from Green Goblin's glider, while Iceman and Firestar fly on opposite sides of them. Very straightforward, but dynamic enough to be engaging. Goblin's legs seem to be split oddly far apart, however, and while it's not a complaint, it's funny to me that it looks like the head of his glider is trying to function as a sensor bar. Judging from his face, he's feeling those splits. Spider-Man! Firestar! Iceman, together for the first time. In reality, the show had aired the month prior, but I suppose this is them together for the first time in comic form. The next page switches from a blue void to an orange one, and we have some narration to introduce our heroes as they again fly across the page with their method of choice. Though somehow Firestar has managed to lose the jet stream that typically follows after her, and introducing the lovable Miss Lion! Ah yes, Miss Lion. The Spider-Friends' dog, the quintessential cute character to occasionally use for jokes or to put in peril to motivate our heroes. I appreciate the hesitation in the text, like the narrator himself takes a moment to process it. Also, the way this outline bubble is drawn around him, it makes it look like he's levitating alongside the Spider-Friends. The story starts proper with a shot of a small plane caught in a storm. The plane's passenger is one Norman Osborn, just released from a 3-year stay at a sanitarium outside New York City, and desperate enough to return home that he's had his pilot fly him despite the turbulent weather. At last, after 3 long years, the doctors say I'm cured. I can go back to my work in chemical research. I can be Norman Osborn again. Not that other creature they say I turn into. I'll admit, I can't really think of a fitting joke here. Norman's struggle with his Green Goblin alter has always felt tragic to me, so I think it might be in bad taste to crack wise about his rehabilitation. I will, however, point out that in this recreation of the Green Goblin's origins, it looks as if the chemical explosion not only created the Goblin persona, but caused the Goblin's costume, glider, and bombs to just materialize like they were already sitting around the lab. The storm worsens, and when a lightning bolt strikes the plane, Norman and his pilot are forced to bail out and parachute to safety. Unfortunately, the winds push them both around violently, and Norman ends up crashing to the ground and sustaining a head injury. And because this is an older comic book, blunt trauma is all it takes to undo 3 years of therapy, and Norman once again succumbs to the Green Goblin. Cured? The fools think I'm cured? Never! The Green Goblin lives again! We cut to Shady Glen, a small suburban college town just outside New York City, and more specifically to a boarding house owned by Aunt May. In the house's window, something is growling, and the next panel tries to jump scare us with this yellow monster mask before it pulls back to reveal Miss Lion, whom has managed to scare himself with the mask he was wearing. Yipes! I scared myself!
Stupid dog!
Angelica Jones and Norma Osborn are getting dressed to attend a superhero-themed costume party at the university, with Norma dressed as the Inhuman Medusa, and Angelica as Spider-Woman. Aunt May, have you seen Bobby Drake and Peter Parker? I'm going to use their full names because heaven forbid I just call them Bobby and Peter and risk confusing the reader. It's not like they were already introduced by full name 2 pages ago. Aunt May's got 2 speech bubbles here, and I get that the idea is that one thing is being said after the other, but normally you just use one connected bubble to show that, so it ends up looking like Aunt May is saying both things at once. Angelica Jones, why did you decide to go dressed like that awful Spider-Woman? It's a private joke between your nephew Peter and me, Aunt May. Once again, just wanted to make it very clear to the reader whose aunt you are. Norma mentions that nobody's complimented her costume, and Aunt May's speech bubble does this weird thing where it starts as a speech bubble and becomes a thought bubble. Since it ends with a thought tail connecting it to Aunt May's head, for 2 seconds I thought Aunt May thought all this to herself and left Norma in awkward silence. Norma, you look stunning. The poor girl. I'm certain she still misses her uncle who was sent away to the sanitarium. That sequence of thoughts reads to me like Aunt May only said she looks good because she feels sorry for her. The poor girl. She thinks Medusa is a good look. On the next page, Bobby Drake comes in dressed as Captain America. Ladies, if you like my Captain America costume, you'll love Peter Parker as your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. I'm conflicted. On the one hand, I do enjoy the idea of Spider-Man attending a costume party wearing a low-quality version of his own suit, especially if he might need to actually fight while wearing it, but I also would have really gotten a kick out of Peter Parker dressed as literally any other character. Thor, Wolverine, Human Torch maybe? Instead, we have this wonderfully crappy rendition of the spider suit, complete with this super dimpy version of the spider emblem and the word Spider-Man written across the torso. You know, in case people forgot who you're supposed to be. Also, Spider-Man without his mask lenses isn't real. He can't hurt you. Only Bobby and Angelica know I'm the real web spinner. Oh, classic comics. Always explaining everything. I will not miss that. Check out the pose he's doing here. It looks so needlessly dramatic for what he's saying. I assure you, us being late to a costume party is the worst possible thing. We hit the party, and there's a ton of people in various costumes. I actually feel proud that I recognize the bulk of the crowd. The obvious starters are Spider-Man, Spider-Woman, Captain America, and Medusa, and then we have Colossus, Storm, Moondragon, Mephisto, Black Widow, Daredevil, Archangel, Nova, Iceman, Jean Grey, Loki, Wolverine, Hellcat, Nighthawk, and... wow, it's great! Everyone's dressed like a superhero! Yeah, except for the guy dressed as noted Nazi supercriminal Red Skull. Somehow this raises more red flags for me than the person who dressed up as Loki or Mephisto, but to be fair, those two are a bit more nebulous as a concept relative to the real world. That all said, I really hope Bobby gets a picture taken of him throwing a mock punch at Red Skull. If that guy came to the party hoping someone would be dressed as Captain America specifically so they could do that, that's awesome. Thanks for biting the bullet. I didn't know I was so popular. Don't let it go to your head, Peter. The group of Spider-Men in mutually crummy costumes is a good laugh, especially since they all seem to have the same inaccuracy in their suit, where the red on the neck doesn't extend down their torso like it does on a real thing. I wonder if this was Vince Colletta cutting corners on drawing the chest details and explaining it away as, well, they're not supposed to be good costumes. This gentleman actually has lenses in his mask, funny enough. I guess he wouldn't stand for a mask without them. The others just don't have their eye areas colored in. On the next page, Peter gets buzzed by the Green Goblin, and this makes him so tilted he turns at a 45-degree angle. It turns out to be a fake, suspended from the ceiling by wires, but that just makes me wonder how they got all this set up. Are those people in costumes? And if so, how long have they been up there? Alright, so you're just gonna be squatting on a fake glider hanging on a wire, and you're gonna be swinging around like that all night. And, what if I fall off? About a 13-foot drop onto a hardware floor, possibly other partygoers. Sign me the hell up. Peter's spider sense goes off, and I think it's portrayed as this orange aura that's tinting everything, because his costume turns green for a single panel as a result. These goblins may be fake, but something's making me tingle.
Some damn enchiladas!
Peter takes off in a hurry, and this running pose just makes me imagine him falling onto his knees in the next panel. He's so low to the ground compared to other people. Well, of all a nerve! He's a superhero, Angie. You're a superhero. You know he has an early warning system for danger. If you notice Peter Parker rushing off all of a sudden, you should probably go after him. Finding a nearby deserted classroom, Peter Parker undergoes a startling transformation. And by startling transformation, we mean taking off his crappy costume and putting on his real one. Excuse me everyone, I need to make a startling transformation. I ditched that cheap dime store Spider-Man costume and changed into the real thing, 'cause it's web spinning time. Spider-Man then proceeded to spin a giant web and then just hang out on it until a criminal happened to get stuck. Only then may he feed. Gotta love how the tendency for characters in older comics to explain themselves just makes them sound incredibly forgetful. Like Spider-Man had just changed outfits and needed to remind himself of why he did that. Where was he even keeping the real costume anyway? Peter's spider sense directs him toward the Osborn Science Building, and seeing a window on the top floor is open, Peter decides to swing inside. But no sooner does the wondrous web swinger enter the building than he finds himself under attack. Man, the encounter rates here suck. It just took 2 steps and suddenly... His unseen assailant finally rolls over Spidey's AC, and since Spider-Man's entire build focuses on evasion over tanking, it knocks him out cold. There! I knew you couldn't avoid my ray blasts forever. Take that, Dex nerd! Later, when consciousness returns to the dazed wall crawler. Oh no! Spidey not see the person who was shooting at him? It was a fully lit room, and he was dressed like this. Also, it looks like goblins contracted the same disease that causes Daphne Blake's eyes to be her skin tone. Yes, Spider-Man! You were at the mercy of the Green Goblin, and you already know that I don't have any mercy. Green Goblin explains that the lab's vault contains the formula which had turned Norman Osborn into the Goblin. Now, he plans to take the formula and use it on the population of New York, turning everyone into a goblin just like him. Now, in reality, the goblin visage is just a rubber mask, so while the formula wouldn't literally turn people into goblins, it would still cause a lot of harm, especially if someone were to have a more adverse reaction. I do like this shot of a bunch of goblins milling around New York. They don't even look particularly distraught about their predicament. They probably all just wonder how they all got the same floppy cap that the Goblin wears, or how this guy got so tall. Goblin uses a liquid nitrogen bomb, making the vault's steel door brittle so he can shatter it with a single punch. I would have assumed Goblin would know the vault's combination since it belonged to him, but okay. Meanwhile, at the costume party, Angelica is finally becoming suspicious of Peter's absence. Peter's been gone an awfully long time. It's almost like you know he's a superhero. Angelica decides to finally go after Peter, ignoring Bobby's attempts to ask her to dance.
Well, excuse me.
Back at the lab, it seems that the formula has been removed from the vault, and Goblin assumes that since his niece is a student at the university, she must know where the formula is. Angelica calls out for Peter on the other side of the door, and I'm questioning how she got here so fast. The shot of Goblin rifling through the vault had been labeled at that moment, so I had assumed it was happening at the same time as Angelica leaving to look for Peter. But within the span of another panel, she's already at the top floor of the Osborn building looking around. I noticed the light in this building, and I've looked everywhere else for Peter. How? How did you search everywhere in the last 2 panels? Are you Firestar or are you the Flash? With Angelica outside, Goblin decides to booby-trap the door with another liquid nitrogen bomb. When that young lady opens the door, she'll get a chilling reception. The liquid nitrogen in that goblin grenade will freeze you both. Goodbye, Spider-Man. Forever! Gotta love these one-way doors where they can hear Angelica calling out for Peter, but Angelica can't hear Goblin saying the door is booby-trapped. Realizing she's still in her party costume, Angelica decides it's time to suit up. Suddenly, intense waves of mutant heat radiate from the body of Angelica Jones. If I'm going to face trouble, I'll do it as the Human Torch. Actually, we don't have the license. Starfire? That's DC. Firestar. That works. Before Firestar can open the door, Spidey manages to tip his chair over to protect himself from the blast, all while yelling out to Angelica in a vague manner that doesn't actually warn her of the bomb. The bomb goes off, and Firestar reacts by creating a shield of intense heat to protect herself from the liquid nitrogen mist. Spidey, I'm losing power! I can't hold the liquid nitrogen off much longer. It's eating through my heat shield. I'll crystallize! How much liquid nitrogen was in that thing? The last bomb just splattered against the vault and froze it instantly. I kind of assumed that it would just detonate and be done with. The heat does manage to revitalize Spidey, as spiders are notoriously cold-blooded, and he uses his webbing to plug up the canister. I'm pretty sure that would just make it explode from the increasing pressure of the gas inside, but what do I know? I just talk about things on YouTube. Spidey and Firestar rush back toward the party, where Bobby and Norma are now walking home. So the professor said, "Mr. Drake, what's C6H5OH?" And I said, "I'm not sure, but it's on the tip of my tongue." And he said, "Well, you better spit it out, because that's carbolic acid." Oh, Bobby, you're so silly. That face looks like a cry for help. Her wish to escape the conversation is granted when she's suddenly kidnapped by the Green Goblin. Wow, that student really rigged up those wires so you can't... Wires? We're outside. Oh, he is good. Spidey and Firestar bring Bobby up to speed, and he transforms into Iceman so they can pursue the Goblin. His transformation looks significantly more painful compared to Firestar, with him clutching his head as his costume rips itself apart from the cold. It makes me wonder if Angelica's costume was incinerated when she transformed. If so, the amount of money she has to spend on replacing her clothes must be nauseating. The three of them split up with hopes they can cover more ground, and we get some panels of Firestar and Iceman heading for their respective locations. Raising her body temperature until it is lighter than air, Firestar rides the thermal air currents. That's not even close to how that works. If she had a glider meant to catch the updraft that she creates, that would make sense, but a solid human is still denser than air. The Goblin's planning to use a formula that'll change everybody in the city into ugly little green creatures. For Spidey, that would be an improvement, because nothing calms the nerve during a hostage situation like dunking on one of your teammates behind their back. Over at Osborn's old chemical factory, Goblin is busy mixing more of his formula. The perspective here is all kinds of weird, especially the table and the way that the Goblin is standing all crooked. It feels like the room is caving in on itself. Goblin needs to see if his formula actually works, so he tries to convince Norma to drink it, but Spider-Man swings through the window to interrupt him. This face Goblin makes might be my favorite thing in this comic. It's so different from his usual maniacal grin, and combined with his big cartoony eyes, it's just wonderful. Honestly, this might end up being an emote on the Discord server. I'll see what I can do. Spidey breaks the beaker, but Goblin claims he already has enough formula to carry out his plan. There's no telling what damage he can do with that formula. I gotta stop the Goblin before he reaches Anaheim, Azusa, and Cucamonga. Anaheim? Oh no! Green Goblin's going after Disneyland! Spider-Man webs onto the back of Green Goblin's glider, but Goblin begins spinning the glider in a circle until the centrifugal force sends Spidey flying away into freefall. Lucky for him, Iceman arrives just in time to catch him with an ice slide, which sends him crashing into a group of trash cans. Saving your life is getting to be a habit. That's one habit you shouldn't break. Come on, Spidey, you said it yourself. Everybody gets one. Firestar alerts them that Goblin is traveling towards the city reservoir, most likely to pour his Goblin formula into New York's drinking water, and they go to intercept. By the time they reach the reservoir, however, Goblin has already begun to poison the water. Spidey, in his infinite wisdom, decides to web onto the Goblin's glider yet again, but luckily for him, the Goblin doesn't just spin him off like before. Instead, he decides to try and fly Spider-Man into power lines, but Spidey lets go of the glider at the last second, and somehow Goblin ends up crashing into the lines himself. Wouldn't he have hit the lines anyway if he was flying that low? If he wanted to electrocute Spidey, he would have had to fly over the lines, not through them. This just seems like it was a bad plan on all fronts. Back at the reservoir, Iceman and Firestar manage to stop the poison from mixing into the water supply by freezing the reservoir and isolating the water that had already been tainted. Goblin has miraculously survived his collision, and because this is an older comic, electrocution is enough to revert him back to Norman Osborn. He's sent back to the sanitarium, hopefully to finally be cured of the Goblin, and the story ends with the Spider Friends back at the boarding house. And then Spider-Man saved me! He's so wonderful! If you like crawly buggy guys, who are swell-headed, conceited, and overbearing, the Spider Friends, dunking on Peter Parker for not really doing any of the things they claim he does. He made one comment about seeing a couple of other people dressed as Spider-Man at the party, and suddenly he's this conceited egotist? With Spider Friends like these, who need spider enemies? They ask Miss Lion what he thinks of Spider-Man, and after looking as surprised as I am that he's still a character, he pounces Peter thinking, I love him! And on this, our story ends. Well, that comic was... well, there's parts of it that I like, but it feels rather messy overall. The overall plotline is good, and it makes for a memorable first outing by pairing the Spider Friends up against one of Spidey's most famous villains. The art has moments where the poses and perspective feel off, and sometimes characters act or say things that don't really track, like getting angry at Peter for leaving when his spider sense goes off. I know he didn't explain what was going on, but it feels like she was reacting to a totally different situation. As for the writing, a lot of the story does itself a disservice with the constant need to explain what characters are doing or why. I know this is just a trope of older comics, but it's the same reason I struggle with reading them. The dialogue feels so stilted, and with this, it's almost like they're just using lines from a... oh wait, like I said earlier, this comic is an adaptation of Amazing Friends' first episode, and so I think that it would be wise to also take a look at the episode itself to see how they match up. Triumph of the Green Goblin begins not with Norman's plane over the countryside, but with Spider-Man stopping some criminals in a getaway car with the help of Iceman. So that's what was keeping them. The scene is capped off with Iceman tripping a couple police officers with his ice prior to giving them the gems stolen by the thugs, so we're already showing that Spidey isn't the only Spider-Friend with a joking side. Norman Osborn's plane is already over New York City by the time it crashes, and I think that better explains how Goblin managed to round up his gear and set his plan into action. Also, within the Amazing Friends universe, the Green Goblin is a physical transformation, not just a rubber mask, so his plan may indeed turn the citizens of NYC into goblinoids like him. Right away, the pacing of this feels a bit more natural, especially since we skip on the Goblin's origin story for right now, instead explaining it alongside his evil plan to tie them both together. Little confused how neither Spidey or Iceman noticed the plane crash and explode, though. At the boarding house, Angelica and Mona Osborn are getting into costume. It's a subtle difference, but I did think it was silly that Norman's niece was named Norma in the comic. Makes me wonder if they changed it for the show for similar reasons. The next major difference is that Spider-Man's costume isn't a cheap knockoff. Instead, Peter's wearing his real costume with a fake mask, which makes it a lot easier to explain his costume change later, as it would be significantly easier for Peter to hide his mask on his person than an entire second suit. So far, the dialogue feels tighter than the comic, and most lines over explaining everything aren't present. I have to assume those were added in during the writing process for the adaptation. A number of lines were cut during the adaptation process, and I understand that not everything from an episode will make it into the comic, but what they chose to cut caused some interactions to lose their context. When Angelica takes offense to Peter leaving the party in a hurry, it's because another woman had been flirting with him beforehand, so she probably thought he was being a horn dog and running off with the first girl he met at the party. She even uses her heat powers to ruin the girl's makeup, which again shows that neither of Spider-Man's amazing friends are above using their powers for a laugh or for their own gain. The comic had instead made them seem infallible, only ever doing the right thing with their powers, unless it was specifically at Spidey's expense. Spidey gets shot with the ray gun immediately upon entering the lab, and while the comic had him bound by a chain and rope, the cartoon had it be some kind of stasis field that kept him from moving or speaking until Firestar's microwaves interrupted the field. Goblin had already opened the safe by the time Spidey arrived, and the liquid nitrogen was merely used to demonstrate its effects on metal before he rigged his trap, which happened to use a tank of liquid nitrogen laying around the lab. I thought it was kind of weird that he suddenly had liquid nitrogen bombs in the comic. There's still not really a good excuse for Angelica finding Peter at the Osborn building, but a time dissolve between her leaving the party and climbing the stairs to the lab helps it not feel like she just teleported. We still get a nice,
"Well, excuse me,"
from Bobby though. Bobby and Mona's conversation is unfortunately void of chemistry jokes, so I guess the comic really is the superior version. The way the Goblin kidnaps her is way better here though, since Bobby thinks he's just a dude in a costume and gives Mona permission to go off with him before Goblin scoops her up, and it takes him a moment to realize what just happened.
"See you back at the gym."
Iceman's comment about Spidey becoming a goblin being an improvement is also said aloud with the whole group present, so it feels more like a jab and good fun than something he just keeps to himself. Still less than amazing timing considering Mona had just been kidnapped. I love this shot of Goblin using a damn candle to heat up a beaker. Like, dude, you have the means to make goblin venom, but you don't have a burner? He's so proud that he thought of it too. Here's another difference, an entire scene that was cut from the comic in which Spider-Man first enters the factory and gets trapped in a box with walls designed to keep him from clinging to them. A hole at the bottom of the trap has two serrated panels chomping together, and I find this kind of laughable considering this was a trap built with Spider-Man in mind. Spider-Man, a hero whose powers involve bullet-fast reflexes, who could just time a gap in the blades and jump through. There's no trap beyond the blades, and that's how he manages to escape, and it makes me wonder why Goblin didn't have it feed into, like, an incinerator or acid. He escapes by webbing the crusher shut and ripping one of the panels out, which again confuses me because the walls were designed with Spidey's wall crawling in mind, but Goblin didn't account for his web shooters? And after he takes the beaker from Goblin, he just stands there and huffs it? The glider ride goes a little differently too, with Spidey not being flung away, but instead looping around to catch Goblin by surprise.
"The first thing to do is get rid of this Green Goblin goop."
I'm not touching it, let's move on. He gets thrown off by the glider suddenly making a steep incline over Central Park, which explains why he couldn't just web onto something to break his fall. Speaking of breaking falls, the way he lands on Iceman's slide may have done more damage than anything Goblin did. Yet again, Goblin crashing into the power lines feels entirely like it's his fault. Spidey bails out way before it happens, and he has all the time in the world to pull up. The fact that his glider explodes and he just straight up disappears makes it all the more miraculous that he survives. I didn't mention this before, but they chose to dispose of the tainted water by pouring it down the storm drain, and I really feel like there's a better way of handling that, like taking it to a waste disposal facility or pour it into the sewer. Enjoy your Goblin Gators.
"Did I become another person?" "Well, let's just say, if you went on stage, you could sing a duet with yourself."
The Goblin has ruined his life, Bobby. Don't be a dick. And in the wrap-up scene with everyone dunking on Spider-Man, Peter actually brings it upon himself by milking the situation for compliments. Cutting that line out just makes the others' comments come out of nowhere, but here it's them basically just telling him not to let Mona's praise go to his head. Also, Aunt May joins in on the slam session, and it's criminal that they cut this from the comic. So, with the episode fresh in my mind, this comic really doesn't do it justice. A lot of the best parts of the episode are either cut or have their context removed, only to be replaced with over-explainy dialogue that turns a pretty straightforward plotline into a slog. I enjoy comic books a lot, but I'll admit that I do not enjoy the earlier conventions of the medium, and the fact that the cartoon lacks most of these problems makes it a lot easier for me to recommend it. Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends #1 is an interesting experiment in adapting a cartoon episode to comic form, but I'm sure it's been done better elsewhere. This comic is just a messy adaptation, and with the way they portray the Spider-Friends' relationship, I really wouldn't be interested in reading any further had they produced more issues. Amazing Friends, I think you make a good show, but a bad comic book. Now if you'll excuse me, I have some cartoons to watch. Thanks for sitting through this admittedly weird review. If there's something you think might make for an interesting next topic, feel free to leave a comment down below, where you can also find a link to our Discord. I'm open to taking a look at just about anything, so don't be afraid to ask. Unless it's like hentai or something. This isn't that kind of channel. I'm looking at you. As always, lots of love to my patrons Oliver Holterstrom, Dakota Hall, Avian, Ryo Hazuki, and Leo Hicks. I've been bad about the shoutouts, and I think I should bring them back. Again, feel free to let me know if there's anything I can do to make pledging more worthwhile. I owe you folks everything. Until we meet next time, this is Salmon from Salmon TV, signing off.